welcome back, everybody. This is John Craig, and it is another edition of Walking in Spirit and Truth. And it's good to be with you. We've been going through the journey and the adventure. Yes, it's been an adventure of Enoch. We've been going through it. In fact, last week we left off right in the middle of this like huge, long supervision that Enoch had and that he was sharing with Methuselah before he married Methuselah's mother, whose name was Edna. We learned that in the book of Enoch. So, and he was going through, and he has this vision, and it's all in metaphorical language. And in that metaphorical language, we are actually seeing just like this whole, it was like this whole picture of leading up to Egypt, going, and then coming to the point of this sheep that becomes a man and acts as a conductor and leads the people right out of where? Out of Egypt. And we have this whole picture of going to the mountain and the golden calf. We did all that last week. Do you remember that? And so it's been a very interesting journey. We're going to pick up from where we left off last week and go a little bit deeper into the story this week. I think you're going to find it very interesting. And why do I say that? Well, it's because we have a lot of different things, and of all times, I tell you what, I don't know if it's you or me or whatever, but it seems like there is so much going on. I'm having to buckle up double seat belts because the world around us is changing so fast and so quickly. All right. Well, that said, who are we and who am I? Well, my name is John Craig, and I pastor Life of Worship Ministries along with my wife, Sandi, and who happens to be just over there and probably listening. No, she's actually working. But nevertheless, we pastor Life of Worship here in Amarillo, Texas, and we gather together on Shabbat here, and where we have a time where we study the Torah at noon Central Time. And so if you want to come and join us locally, you are more than welcome to be part of our Torah study. That's from 12 to approximately 2 o'clock. And then we get a little break, and then we have our encounter service at 3 p.m. on Shabbat, on Saturday afternoon. That's 3 p.m. Central. And where we have a time of praise and worship and ministry and a message and just to minister to the people and minister before the Most High and to love on Him. I mean, after all, we need to pause and do that and take advantage of the day that He set apart for us, so we can connect with Him. I think it does more. I think it does more for our lives than anything, just to be able to gather together. It kind of gives us that good reset. It's not just like taking a day off. You know, some people say, well, it's Shabbat, I'm just going to take a day off and I'm not going to gather or whatever. But no. We want to get together and gather because there's something synergizing about and inspiring about being together on Shabbat. Wouldn't you agree? So if you're not locally, you can join us here on the Life of Worship Ministries YouTube channel. And we love our family that show up online, and we get to chat and even have opportunities for you to call in as well. And so there you go. That's it. That's what's happening on Shabbat. And then, of course, the different broadcasts that we have throughout the week, like Walking in Spirit and Truth, or Let Us Reason Together on Monday mornings, or the War Room on Monday mornings. And stay tuned for other great developments, and because the Father's doing all sorts of great things, and we just want to be part of it. We're going to jump into it and go a little bit further, but into this journey, this adventure that we've been having, this vision of Enoch. But I do want to say this, we appreciate you as a partner. Those that give financially to this ministry and are able to do that, we are so blessed to have you financially, as well as those of you who say, well, I'm not able to give anything at this point in time, but you're a prayer partner with us. And so we certainly need lots of encouragement that way with prayer, and to hold up our arms and to cover us and protect us because of the things in ministry that the Father is leading us into and He's having us do. And it doesn't come without a cost. I'm saying it's not not just the financial cost of ministry. I'm talking about the toll and the tax, the spiritual toll and taxing upon our souls because of the type of ministry that we're involved in. So please be praying for us. We certainly appreciate that as well. Okay, well, you say, well, how can we give? And let me just pop up a little banner here where you can go to Life of Worship Amarillo.org, all one long word, Life of Worship Amarillo.org. And this is a great place to bring your tithe, bring an offering, to give a love gift, and also to let other people know about, to like, share, and subscribe. And also, you know what else that helps those algorithms? When you comment. Now, what I'm saying is commenting during the show is awesome, but also, after the show's over and the video has moved into archive mode, and then like when you pull up a video, there's a place for comments underneath that. To comment under that. So like sometimes people, what's this show about? What are people saying? Well, put in a comment of what you thought about the show, where other people would see it, because the ones that are on the live stream right now, they don't always get to see those. In fact, a lot of times that ends up, just the way the program works, doesn't show up. So I'm just I'm talking about like the workings of the software. So comment after the show in that little comment section underneath the video when it's in that archive mode. Enoch this is a long chapter 88, and we're going to pick up where we left off. Okay, here we go. Enoch. So remember where we were at? We'd gotten all the way down to verse 60, and did we set up the characters right? We were talking about about the cows, right? And we went through the story of Noah, and how this one cow had 3 cows, and then we had this multiplication process going on, and then these and so from those cows we end up having sheep. And I mean, it's kind of confused right now but you need to go back and reread if you're trying to remember what happened and all that sort of stuff. But I want to trigger your memory so we have to go back all over that again. But not only that we have the sheep, but then we have all these other animals that attack the sheep. And so when we have these other animals, you think about, well, what are these other animals? And you think, well, if the sheep is a representation of Israel, and then the other animals would happen to be perhaps from other nations, and these other nations go through a process of attacking the sheep, and there's always a defender, and and that's where we see the one that's leading the sheep out of Egypt and taking them on this journey, and which takes on the name of the conductor. The conductor, isn't that a good name for Moses? We think about Moses, our teacher, but could we also say Moses, our conductor? That's a very interesting thought, because he is conducting this train through the wilderness. Okay, so but this time it's a bunch of sheep. Oh yeah, because remember last week we talked about he had gone up to on top of this mountain, and he descended from the top of the rock. And when he was coming down, some of the people that had been with him had gone blind. Well, I mean, some of the sheep that had gone with him had gone blind. Well, and what did we decide about going blind? Is, in other words, they entered into unbelief. How do we know that they entered into unbelief? It's because they built a golden calf, and they were celebrating and dancing and all that sort of stuff around the golden calf. And so this conductor did not like it. He learned about it, and recognizing that they had, verse 56, had wandered from his path. As soon as they beheld him, they feared and trembled in his presence. So, yeah, isn't that right? Isn't that what happened? Is that all of a sudden, here he comes down, and they're like, "Oh, there's Moses. Well, we thought you had died. I mean, you'd gone for 40 days, and we hadn't heard anything, and so we were just needing." We told Aaron to build us a calf to take us back to Egypt. Remember that story, right? Yeah, that's just in a couple Torah portions from now. So, maybe 3. But it says, and he wandered and had wandered from his path. And as soon as they had beheld him, they feared and trembled in his presence, verse 57, and became desirous of returning to their fold. Like, okay, he's back. All right, let's just back to the tribes, everybody. Back to the tribes. Party's over. Well, is that what happened? No. And then that sheep, taking with him other sheep, went to those which had wandered, like about 3,000 of them, and afterwards began to kill them. Well, of course, we know in the story of Moses is that he took the golden calf and he crushed the gold, made it into a powder, and they were able to determine exactly who were the culprits, because it's like like, no, it wasn't me. That wasn't me. But everybody had to drink the gold water. Okay. Then that sheep, taking with him other sheep, went to those which had wandered, and afterwards began to kill them, and they were terrified at his countenance. Then he caused those which had wandered to return, who went back to their fold. I likewise saw there in the vision that this sheep became a man, built a house for Yahweh of the sheep, and made them all stand in the house. Well, isn't that pretty cool? So here's Enoch. He's having this vision, and he continues. He sees this sheep became a man, and he builds. What's he do? He builds a house for Yahweh, and he makes all the sheep stand in the house. Well, we know in the tabernacle was built, right after the golden calf incident. And, like right after, I mean, it took him 9 months to build it, but it was right after that event that Moses went up the mountain and he got the plans. He came back down and he put everybody to work, and he got the craftsmen and all those out there. And they built it and they put it all together. So it says, and going on, it says, verse 61, I perceived also that the sheep which proceeded to meet the sheep, their conductor died. What? I perceived also that the sheep which proceeded to meet the sheep, their conductor died. I saw too that all the great sheep perished, while smaller ones rose up in their place, entered into pasture, and approached a river of water. Then that sheep, their conductor, who became a man, was separated from them and died. All the sheep sought after him and cried for him with bitter lamentation. So I'm saying here, I think what we're looking at is like, well, the journey brought them to the river. Well, what happened right before the river? We see that Aaron died. And then also says the smaller ones rose up in his place, entered into a pasture, approached the river of water. Then that sheep, their conductor, who became a man, was separated from them and died. So as they approached the river, so remember, so we have Aaron that died, the high priest, so he's conductor, and then Moses, who was their conductor, who became a man. He was, of course, separated out, and he went to the top of the mountain and died. And all the sheep sought after him and cried for him with bitter lamentation. It's kind of interesting too, because it's like it's almost like, well, who was the bitter lamentation after? When you go back and you think about what happened when Aaron died, and when Moses died, and when Aaron died, there was a lot of lamentation for that, and they didn't want to believe, and they were like Moses when he died. It's like they didn't want to believe that he died. They went out hunting. Isn't it right? They went hunting for him, looking all over. Surely he's not dead. But going on, it says 64, I saw likewise that they ceased to cry after that sheep and passed over the river of water. I mean, okay, in last week we had them going through in verse 39 that this lake, which was the Red Sea, the lake became divided and the water standing up on both sides before their face. And while their Adonai was conducting them, he placed himself between them and the wolves. Remember that? So that was definitely the that whole, Red Sea situation, last week's Torah portion. And so now we have now we're at the river. So we know that we've gone through the wilderness, and this is all part of the vision that Enoch was given us. So now they're crossing this river, and this is where it might seem kind of jumbled because it's going back and forth and stuff, but so we're going to break this down as we go through it. And I did a little bit of extra work, and so that way we can kind of see what this vision is that Enoch is seeing, and what he had to, well, honestly, what he had to put up with. What he saw Israel, the sheep, would be how they were dealing and putting up with, and the struggles that they would have in terms of all of their future history. Does that make sense? So in other words, Enoch is seeing it prophetically, but it would become Israel's history. Those things that we know within the what we call the Old Testament. So, all right. So going on, I saw likewise that they ceased to cry after that sheep and passed over the river of water, and that there arose other sheep, all of whom conducted them, instead of those who were dead and who had conducted them. I don't know why I put that in there, but so in other words, the ones that died had replacements. I think that's what is basically said. Then I saw that the sheep entered into a goodly place in a territory delectable and glorious. Okay, they entered the promised land, this delectable territory. It was glorious. Okay, no, just going on. And verse 67, I saw also that they became satiated, that their house was in the midst of a delectable territory, and that sometimes their eyes were open and that sometimes they were blind, until another sheep arose and conducted them. He brought them all back, and their eyes were opened. Okay, so now doesn't that sound like the history of Israel? So they cross into the promised land, and they have a variety of judges. I mean, after Joshua, we have a whole list of judges. Like, let's see, who did we have as judges? I have a list of good judges and bad judges. So let me put it on the screen for you. If you're watching on a computer screen as opposed to your cell phone, you probably could see it a little bit better. Or like if you blow it up on a big TV screen, you might be watching that way. So what I have is these judges, the judges of the Old Testament, and these are prophets. Where are the judges? Yeah. So we had good judges. So Othniel, he was the first judge who delivered Israel from the oppression of Cushan Rishathaim. We have Deborah, remember her, the only female judge, and she defeated. You skipped on me. Okay, the Canaanite army led by Sisera. Gideon, had that initial hesitance, but ultimately led Israel to victory against the Midianites. And then we have Jephthah, and he had a controversial vow, but he delivered Israel from the Ammonites. And then Samson, even though he had a very troubled life, that Yah used him to deliver Israel from the Philistines through his acts of great strength, and ultimately lost his life through his one final act. We had some other bad judges along the way. So what did we see? We see here that I saw that they became satiated. What happened when Israel became satiated? And when they, maybe got too much, they got fat and happy, right? And so who needs the Most High when we have more than enough that we need? I mean, there's nothing to pray for, to pray through, or anything like that. I mean, isn't that typically human, kind of our human nature to do something like that? But going on, and that sometimes their eyes were open and that sometimes their eyes were blind. So when their eyes were blind was when they were like well satiated, and then like a generation would pass and the young kids would grow up in that type of environment, and then oppression would come. And so they go through this period of blindness, and until another sheep arose and conducted them, and he brought them all back, and their eyes were opened. Verse 68, then dogs and foxes and wild boars began to devour them until another sheep arose. The master of the flocks wanted themselves a ram to conduct them. This ram began to butt on every side those dogs, foxes, and wild boars until they all perished. So now this is a very interesting, because we have these sheep that are leading them. So though that's why I call these, or the different judges that were leading them. But then a ram rises up, and the master of the flock, one of themselves, a ram to conduct them. So what happened? What was it about Saul? Well, Saul was one of the tribe, right? And here he was, in the midst of the tribe, and they were looking for a king. They wanted a king to lead them. And here's Saul, and he's standing head and shoulders above everybody else. And he's a handsome dude. And it's like, yeah, this guy's really built, and he looks like a good king to us. Let's make him king. And so yeah, he becomes king. And then what did Saul do? He went and he did these headbutts to all these other dogs, foxes, and wild boars until they all perished. He did a lot as a king for Israel to knock out the enemies of Israel. Of course, except in that whole situation, with the witch of Endor and the baying of, when he didn't go out and kill them all and wipe them all out. And so the baying of sheep could be heard. And Samuel said, yeah, you're done. And it says here, verse 69, with his eyes he saw the ram in the midst of them, who had laid aside his glory. And he began to strike the sheep, treading upon them and behaving himself without dignity. Then, so we know part of that was the downfall of Saul, King Saul. Then their Adonai sent a sheep to a still different sheep and raised him up to be a ram and to conduct them instead of that sheep who had laid aside his glory. And I really think it's kind of prophetically talking about in this vision that the first one was Saul, and perhaps the second one is that one that Yah raises up, which makes sense to me. David, who is this worshiper, David that was skilled in the harp, because he'd be in the field playing his harp and singing over the sheep and worshiping, right? Writing songs to the Most High. So going therefore to him, verse 72, and conversing with him alone, he raised up that ram and made him a prince and a leader of the flock. Now, wait a minute. Then their Adonai sent a sheep to still a different sheep. And I think so. So who is the sheep that went to this other sheep? It was David, a ram that would be raised up. I would think that Samuel. I mean, it makes sense to me that Enoch is seeing that first ram set aside his glory and started to beat the sheep and not, ended up losing the dignity of being king. I mean, think about what he did to David. I mean, if David comes into the palace and he becomes jealous of David, and that even to the point he throws a spear at David, he seeks after him, he's searching after him, he wants to kill David. Don't you think anybody else that may have crossed King Saul's path might have not escaped? There might have been a rule of tyranny, because he could feel the power slipping from his hands. So now, the prophet Samuel finds David, he raises him up and made him a prince and a leader of the flock, all the time that the dogs troubled the sheep. Well, why did the dogs trouble the sheep? because Saul has set aside his glory. Saul stopped seeking Yahweh. And in the demise of Saul, the enemies were taking advantage of and encroaching on the borders once again. In fact, wasn't it David that had to kind of help Saul out, even though Saul was seeking after him to push back the enemy? I think so. The first ram paid respect to this latter ram. Then the latter ram arose and fled away from before his face. There's kind of that story. When David was raised up, David came out and he slayed Goliath and Goliath's brothers. And when that happened, the first lamb, did pay respect to him. But then David, the latter ram, had fled away from before his face. He had to flee from Saul. And I saw that those dogs caused the first ram to fall, but the latter ram arose and conducted the smaller sheep. The ram likewise begat many sheep and died. Then there was a smaller sheep, a ram instead of him, which became a prince and a leader, conducting the flock. And that sheep increased in size and multiplied, and all the dogs, foxes, and wild boars feared and fled away from him. So, after David was Solomon. And if I got the order right, it seems to me, I'm just kind of looking at it and kind of, remember the history of the scriptures and all those historical elements, that this would typically be Solomon, I would think, right? So we go on, and that ram also struck and killed all the wild beasts, so that they could not again prevail in the midst of the sheep, nor at any time ever snatch them away. And that house was made large and wide, a lofty tower being built upon it by the sheep for Yahweh of the sheep, or for Yahweh of the sheep. And the house was low, but the tower was elevated and very high. Then Yahweh of the sheep stood upon that tower and caused a full table to approach before him. Again, I saw that those sheep wandered and went various ways, forsaking that their house, that their house went various ways, forsaking that their house, and that their Adonai called to some among them whom he sent to them. But these the sheep began to kill. And when one of them was saved from slaughter, he leaped and cried out against those who were desirous of killing him. But Yahweh of the sheep delivered him from their hands and made him ascend to him and remain with him. And he went also many others to them to testify with lamenting, to exclaim against them. Okay, now what's going on here? So we just talked about three kings, Saul, David, and Solomon. But after that, it's like he's not really talking about these other kings of Israel, but what it seems to be is that Yahweh's sending particular sheep to the people, because ultimately they're kind of wandering. They're going astray. They're forsaking the Most High. And so, let's go back to some of the things that I found. And I just put this in real quick. I was using Grok to give me some summaries, and which was very, very quick. So we have like the kings before the division. We had David, described as a man after God's own heart, though not without his flaws, like the incident with Bathsheba. But nevertheless, and then after that, this is the good kings before the division. And because Saul was listed as first king whose reign ended in tragedy due to disobedience and mental instability. So that would have been the first ram that was, butting all those animals, but he set aside his glory. So then we had David, and then we had Solomon began his reign with the wisdom from God, but later turned away, leading to the division of the kingdom. His early reign is often considered good due to his building of the temple and his wisdom. And then ultimately, we see in Ecclesiastes that how Solomon describes that seeking after all these things is just it's worthless, and that the only thing that really matters is seeking after the Most High. So I personally think that it was the end of Solomon's life. He's like, you know what? I did all these great things. I started right. I had 1,000 wives and even more concubines and whatever, and all the riches I needed and all the wealth and whatever. But it's all pointless without this relationship with the Most High. So that was some of the things to think about, and of course we know in the course of all of Judah's history and all of Israel's history that there were good kings and there were evil kings. There are kings that did pretty well. Some may have started out well, like Uzziah, but then his pride made him fall. Remember he wanted to take on the priestly sacrifice, which he shouldn't have done, and because he thought, man, I got this great relationship with the Most High, let me just do it, and he shouldn't have done that. And he got leprosy and to be separated from the people, and so there was the good, and then there's of course all of the bad kings. Of course, all of the kings of Israel, none of them were good. Oh, I mean, they set up those altars, right, in the north and the south to keep the people, and they changed the times and the seasons and all that in order to keep people from going down to Jerusalem to worship and celebrate at the feast days. I mean, after all, that's just a lot of tourist money. Why should it all go to Jerusalem? I mean, they should take that tourist money and to the two ulterior or alternate places of worship and keep the money in the country, right? Well, so and then of course there was all these bad kings of Judah as well. I mean, there's a lot. Look at it. That's a long list. That's a long list of kings of Israel and Judah. We know what happened. I mean, Israel was taken into captivity, and Judah was taken into captivity, and ultimately, we have a destruction of really what true Israel. I mean, true Israel never recovered after the division. The division was just the first, the downfall. And Judah tried to hold on, but according to Hosea, that she was more. She was the sister that was even more wicked. So a lot of reasons for that, especially after studying out things out of the Dead Sea Scrolls and understanding how the particular parties wrenched or usurped the power from the true priesthood, and so that problem still exists today. So those are some things. But then I asked Grok, I asked the question this. I said, well, let's talk about these, not just the judges, but I wanted to talk about the prophets. Because think about this, about the prophets and their persecutions. Well, Moses, we know what he had to endure, so we'll skip him. But what about Elijah? I think Elijah was the one that was talked about, that he ascended. It's about this one. But remember, Elijah was persecuted by Ahaz, right? That was his name. I think Ahab, right? Ahab. Elijah was persecuted by Ahab and Jezebel, of course. And he lived out in the wilderness for a long time, keeping himself separated from them because of all these threats. And then ultimately, the Mount Carmel situation and really taking to task all of the prophets of Baal. And of course, Ahab and Jezebel didn't like that, so they tried to hunt. Well, they said they were going to hunt him down, but Elijah got away. But ultimately, Elijah ascended. Well, it's almost like Yahweh allowed him, because of the great persecution, to have this amazing, well, they call it chariot ride, but to ascend. He didn't die. Yeah. So then there was, and then also Elisha, and he also faced opposition from the kings of like Joram, who did not heed his prophecies. Remember when he was being mocked by a group of youths? And a bear came out and mauled him. Like, you know what they said to him? They said, "Hey, Baldy." Yeah, they did. It's in the word. It's in the scripture. They called him a name. And so even the animal kingdom was standing on the side of Elisha. So, so what about Isaiah? Isaiah, now it suggests that he was sown in two under King Manasseh's reign. That's one. Jeremiah, boy, he faced a whole bunch of persecution. In fact, he was imprisoned. He was also thrown into a cistern and left to die, but he was rescued when Nebuchadnezzar's armies broke through into Jerusalem. And always being accused and of treason and demonized by the people. Yeah, he went through a lot. So Ezekiel, he lived among the exiles in Babylon. Remember that. Amos was ordered to leave Israel by Amaziah, the priest of Bethel, and accused of conspiring against the king. Hosea was likely a source of mockery and misunderstanding. Just kind of when you go through the writings and you think, some of the things that you hear, you think, man, that's really bold. But sometimes, think about this: when one is in the right and yet confronted doubly by those who are evil, what is kind of like a normal reaction? To double down and hold that ground and speak it forth even more sternly. I mean that's one thing to think about. But Micah, his prophecies against Jerusalem's leaders led to threats for those in power. Zechariah, son of Jehoiada, was stoned to death in the court of the house of Yahweh for his accusations against the people. They stoned him. Uriah, son of Shemaiah, fled to Egypt for safety, but was extradited and brought back to Judah and executed by King Jehoiakim. Yeah, that's not good. Daniel was thrown in the lion's den, and we know about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were thrown in the fiery furnace. And Micaiah, imprisoned by King Ahab for prophesying defeat against Ahab's wishes. I want you to prophesy, but it better not be negative. Did we not hear that before? In other similar stories. So Yeshua talks about the different prophets that were killed. And even this, I mean, Paul went down to persecute even the sons of Zadok down in Damascus. And Damascus being that area of the Qumran area and those down by the Dead Sea. That's where he went. And he went to gather them up. And yet Paul then had his conversion experience. So, Stephen, right? Stephen was stoned for revealing they worshipped the star of Rephan and a whole bunch of other things as well. So this is kind of interesting. And so Enoch is actually talking about verse 86 here in chapter where we are again, 88. But these are the sheep. The sheep began to kill, and when one of them was saved from slaughter, he leaped and cried out against those who were desirous of killing him. But Yahweh of the sheep delivered him from their hands and made him ascend to him and remain with him. So I'm thinking, that could be Elijah there. He sent also many others to them, so to the sheep, the wandering sheep, the ones that went willfully blind. To testify and with lamentation to exclaim against them. Again, I saw when some of them forsook the house of their Adonai and his tower, wandering on all sides and growing blind. I saw that Yahweh of the sheep made a great slaughter among them in their pasture until they cried out to him in consequence of that slaughter. Well, what would the slaughter be? They go to war and lose? That would make sense to me. Then he departed from the place and left them. Then he departed from the place and left them in the power of lions, tigers, and wolves, and the hyenas, and the power of foxes, and of every beast. And the wild beasts began to tear them. I saw too that he forsook the house of their fathers and their tower, giving them all into the power of the lions to tear and devour them, into the power of every beast. Then I began to cry out with all my might, imploring Yahweh of the sheep, and showing him how the sheep were devoured by all the beasts of prey. So, isn't this interesting? Because now we have Enoch, and he's interacting within his vision. So he's having a vision. He sees this thing. He sees the sheep, the people of Israel, and how they're wandering, how they're blind, how they need a divine intervention. They need a revival. They need an awakening, right? And he is interacting before the Most High, saying, you got to do something here, because he's seeing something from his perspective, the pre-flood. It's prophetically looking into the future, which would become history from our end, looking back on it. And it says, but he looked on in silence. Who looked on in silence? Yahweh looked on in silence. Yahweh looked on, rejoicing that they were devoured, swallowed up, and carried off, and leaving them in the power of every beast for food. He called also 70 shepherds and resigned to them the sheep, that they might overlook them. I would like to know what the actual Hebrew word there is, rejoicing that they were devoured, because I don't really see that Yahweh is rejoicing that his sheep are getting devoured. But I think more so that he's like, yeah, you got it coming to him. No, I don't think he's saying that at all. I think he's saying more like that perhaps I just don't see it as rejoice. I don't think rejoicing is the right word. It can't be the right translation. That's my opinion, because I think it breaks the Father's heart. I mean, look at Jeremiah. Jeremiah, who's considered to be the author of the book of Jeremiah, as well as the book of Lamentation, and you hear the heart cry of Jeremiah that he's delivering through his message in Lamentation, and also during the whole book of Jeremiah, where Jeremiah is prophesying against Israel, saying, look, you guys need to repent. But he's not. When I've read through the book of Jeremiah, it's like his heart is pure. It's aching. It's hurting for the people. And I really feel like that's the true expression of the Most High. I can't really say, maybe it's somebody else that's rejoicing that they were devoured, swallowed up, and carried off, and leaving them in the power of every beast for food. He called also 70 shepherds. But then again, it says he called also 70 shepherds and resigned to them the sheep, that they might overlook them. Now, historically, that would be something I'd like to know. When was the Council of the Sanhedrin set up? Right? When was the Council of the Sanhedrin set up? And maybe that's worth asking the question. The Council of the Sanhedrin, or simply the Sanhedrin, was established around 191 BC during the Hasmonean period. This period followed the Maccabean revolt, and the Sanhedrin began to take shape as an organized institution with defined roles and responsibility under Hasmonean leadership. And of course, we've talked about the Hasmonean leadership, that it was a mixed leadership of where Edom came in and began to have power within the priesthood and the king of Israel. So in this Hasmonean leadership, so 191 BC. Well, what was the Council of the Sanhedrin? There were 70 leaders of Israel, and where did that come from? And well, we see that the priestly community that had exiled themselves from Jerusalem were not part of the Sanhedrin of Israel, at least not at this point in time, from my understanding. I mean, it could be wrong, but that Sanhedrin was made up of what they would call the parties of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Okay, verse 95, saying to them and to their associates, every one of you henceforward overlook the sheep, and whatsoever I command you, do, and I will deliver them to you numbered. And I will tell you which of them shall be slain, these destroy. And he delivered the sheep to them. Then he called to another and said, understand and watch everything which the shepherd shall do to these sheep, for many more of them shall perish than I have commanded. Well, think about that. Shaul, also known as Paul in the New Testament, think about what they did. In particular, they they pursued those that had separated themselves and lived among the communities of, shall we call it what they called themselves, the sons of Zadok. They called themselves the community of the way, or the community of the Echad. Some have tried to put label of Essenes. It doesn't really fit completely, but they were definitely not the Pharisees, definitely not the Sadducees. So these are the others. These were the Nazarites, from which Yeshua comes from as well. And what if we see what Paul was doing? They would send out assassins to take out the leadership. Anybody that would be considered a candidate for the high priestly role, because they were out of this group, they were the true sons of Zadok, the ones that should take on the full, complete high priestly role. They were just in exile. It was the Pharisees that would send out the assassins. So we do see this. And so why were there sheep that were slaughtered that were not supposed to be slaughtered? And why were there extra sheep being slaughtered anyway? Yet we do know that there were many in Israel that perished under the evil rulership of the Hasmonean kingdom. And the leadership that was usurped and put into power there in Jerusalem. And they would kill many of the good people. And it would be all under the watchful eye of the Sanhedrin, which is kind of sad. So, well, we're going to have to pick this up again next week because we're out of time. So thank you so much for being part of Walking in Spirit and Truth today. And I hope to see you next time. Y'all willing, we'll be back here next Tuesday. And so until then, shalom, shalom.
If you missed today's show or want to watch it again or want to tell someone where they can watch this episode, go to lambnetwork.tv, where you will find this show and all the other live Lamb show archives in the on-demand section of the website. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to tell someone about the Messianic Lamb Network. We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussions, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take the tour of the lambnetwork.tv website. I'm Sandi Craig, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.